History is usually remembered through the names of emperors and the chronology of wars. Yet the true face of an age is always hidden within the ordinary days of nameless people. The stillness around a well at dawn, the rumble of cartwheels heading toward the market, the smell of freshly baked bread, the graffiti left on an alley wall, a baby's first cry. The noise of midday mingled with love, quarrels, and expectation. Civilization is built upon such small and repeated moments, and human life always flows upon the foundation of a today that feels as though nothing will ever happen. For a long time, Pompeii has been remembered only as a destroyed city. But the Pompeii this piece looks toward is not the city after it became ruins, but the city of people still alive and breathing. Before the volcano tore open the sky, there was a merchant worrying about business, a slave preparing the morning for a master, parents trembling before the birth of a child, and a young lover carving affection into a wall. They were not great heroes, nor figures standing at the center of history. But precisely because of that, their single day reaches us, who live 2,000 years later, more vividly and more painfully. Before it is a record of a great disaster, this piece is an attempt to restore the rhythm of life that did not stop until the very instant disaster fell. If we follow the excavated relics, the marks on the walls, the remains inside the hearths, the gestures turned rigid, and the empty spaces of silence, history is no longer a distant ruin of the past, but a mirror reflecting ourselves. The final day of people who never doubted tomorrow ultimately asks us the same question: how deeply are we loving and living today? Now let us turn back time and step into that city where one ordinary morning became eternity. There, before the immense noise of tragedy, we will first encounter the quiet yet burning breath of people who were living their lives to the very end. Today's book, 1 p.m., August 24th, AD 79, The Day That Stopped. This story is a reconstruction of the final morning hours of Pompeii in AD 79, the city forever halted by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. For a long time, humanity remembered the date of this vast tragedy as August 24th, relying on the letter sent by Pliny the Younger to Tacitus. But as the ash that had hardened over thousands of years was slowly lifted away, the hidden side of history began to whisper a new truth. Inside excavated hearths were found pomegranates, figs, and walnuts, fruits that ripen only when autumn is deep. People had met their end wearing thick woolen clothing. The jars of must, sealed only after the grape harvest was complete, had already been firmly closed. And above all, on the wall of a house in the Reggio 5 district, a charcoal inscription was discovered. On the 16th day before the calends of November, he overate. A late day in October, already past the threshold of autumn. On that day, when the cool wind descending along the Vesuvius range swept through the city's narrow alleys, Pompeii's final sun rose as brilliantly and indifferently as ever. This piece follows, in dense detail, the paths of ordinary people who lived their lives fiercely upon the vast stage of Pompeii during just 7 hours, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just before the immense wrath of nature swallowed the city whole. 6 a.m., omen, drying wells, and the cry of beasts. While the sun still crouched below the horizon of the Campanian plain, the city lay in bluish darkness. On the northern outskirts of Pompeii, near a branch of the great aqueduct Aqua Augusta, which began in Misenum and supplied life-giving water throughout the city, the water overseer Gavius tilted his head in confusion. The flow that should have been pouring into the Castellum Aquae had been reduced to half its usual volume, and the water running through the lead pipes carried a faint but disgusting smell of sulfur. "How could the source be drying up when it isn't even the dry season?" Gavius muttered, holding his torch closer. For several days, unpleasant tiny tremors had been felt beneath the ground. But after the great earthquake of AD 62, mild earthquakes were no more than an everyday nuisance to the people of Pompeii. No one regarded them as omens of death. At that same hour, stray dogs wandering the alleys growled low with their tails tucked, and birds that had nested beneath the eaves of a domus flew in flocks toward the sea before dawn had even broken. The earth was taking its last breath, barely suppressing the boiling organs within it, yet the sleeping city could not hear that rough breathing. 7 a.m., the city awakens, a symphony of cartwheels and brooms. At last, the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the graceful ridges of Mount Vesuvius. The road entering Pompeii through the southern Porta Stabiana, by way of the mouth of the Sarno River, was already alive with merchants' shouts and the cries of animals. The merchant Gaius walked beside his heavy wooden cart pulled by an ox, lightly flicking his whip. "Come on, just a little farther. We have to reach the Macellum before the sun is high." On the cart, dozens of red clay jars with pointed bases, amphorae, were packed tightly between bundles of straw. On Gaius's amphorae, written clearly in dark red ink, were the words, "Premium garum, produced by the House of Scaurus." This salty, savory fish sauce, made by fermenting the entrails of mackerel and anchovies with salt under the sun, was Pompeii's finest specialty and an ingredient beloved by Romans throughout the Mediterranean. The grid of roads, tightly paved with great polygonal slabs of basalt, gleamed with the dew that had fallen overnight, and each time a wheel rolled through the deep grooves worn into the stone, the dull clattering sound echoed like the heartbeat awakening the city's morning. As Gaius drove his cart along the great road of Via dell'Abbondanza, the tabernae on the ground floors of the tightly packed multi-story apartment blocks called insulae began opening their wooden shutters one by one. From the oven of Modestus's bakery came the smell of panis quadratus, round loaves scored into 8 sections, made from fine flour ground all night by a mule-powered millstone. The aroma poured into the street and stirred Gaius's hunger fiercely. At the same time, in the splendid house known as the Casa dei Vedi in the city center, an entirely different atmosphere prevailed. The house of the Vedi brothers, former slaves who had amassed enormous wealth through commerce, symbolized Pompeii's newly rich class. Chloe, a young slave girl from Gaul, held a palm broom longer than herself and swept the marble floor of the atrium, the central hall open to the sky. She was clearing away the traces of the lavish banquet her master had hosted the night before. Morning light entered through the opening in the ceiling, the compluvium, struck the central rain-catching basin, the impluvium, and cast rippling patterns across Chloe's cheeks. Scattered across the floor lay half-eaten figs, oyster shells, crumbs of broken bread, and red stains from spilled Falernian wine, the finest vintage of Campania. On the walls, splendid fourth-style frescoes, creating vivid illusions of depth, looked down upon her. Cupids making perfume, mythical scenes, such as the birth of Hercules, they shone brilliantly as though mocking Chloe's exhausting labor. The fatigue from a sleepless night in the cramped, dark slave quarters with no windows weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet Chloe hurried with the broom. Before her strict and capricious master awoke, she had to restore the marble to a perfect gleam if she wished to avoid a beating. For her, Pompeii's morning was nothing more than the beginning of endless labor, erasing her own life in order to uphold her master's life within the shadow of a vast house. 8:30 a.m. The birth of life, the future of a family begins to breathe. In a quieter residential district in the western part of the city, where the wind carried the salty scent of the sea, a desperate struggle between life and death was unfolding in an inner chamber of a domus, a cubiculum. A young Roman citizen named Marcus paced before the doorway, wiping his sweat-soaked palms again and again on the hem of his tunic. From inside came the painful cries of his wife Julia and the sharp voice of the old midwife Syra. "Just a little more, my lady. Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth, is watching over you." In Roman society, childbirth was not merely a private event of welcoming new life. It was the most significant political and social act of all, producing a legitimate citizen who would inherit the family name and the household property. In an age when, due to medical limitations, the mortality rates of both mother and child were terrifyingly high, Marcus leaned against the doorpost and prayed countless times to the household guardian spirits, the Lares. The servant girls of the house untied every knot in the home and flung the doors wide open, lest evil forces hinder the birth or the umbilical cord become entangled. Julia herself had loosed her hair, letting it hang down freely, and sat on a birthing chair deeply cut into a crescent shape, enduring agony with all the strength in her body. Wah! Wah! At last, slicing through the thick air of the room filled with blood and sweat, there burst forth a sharp, vibrant cry of life. The door creaked open, and the midwife Syra, wearing a linen apron marked with bloodstains, emerged with a smile shining through her sweat. Congratulations! A very healthy and strong baby boy, my lord. Marcus entered the room on trembling legs. After gently kissing the forehead of his pale wife, who lay collapsed upon the bed, he approached the tiny red newborn, washed in warm olive oil and water. Every slave and relative in the room fell silent, as if by prior agreement. Under the severe order of Roman law and paterfamilias, if the father did not acknowledge the child as his own blood, that child could be abandoned, sold into slavery, or left to be devoured by beasts. Marcus knelt, reached out with shaking hands, and grasped the child's little body lying upon the floor. Then, he lifted the baby high to the level of his own eyes. Tollere liberum, to lift up the child. It was the sacred declaration that the head of the household accepted the child as a lawful member and heir of the family. A sigh of relief and smiles of joy broke out through the room. On the dies lustricus, the day of purification on the 9th day after birth, the child would receive his formal praenomen and wear around his neck the golden amulet called a bulla, meant to ward off evil fortune. Hot tears flowed from Marcus's eyes. The warm morning sun, coming in through the window, touched the soft forehead of Pompeii's newest citizen. No one could have imagined that this child would never live to see his day of purification. 9:30 a.m. Desire. Written on a wall, Successus's one-sided love and the liveliness of the street. As the sun climbed toward the middle of the sky, the heat of the city rose with it. The streets had become a vast mosaic crowded with people of every rank. Successus, a fuller who washed and dyed wool, stood lingering in front of a thermopolium, a tavern at the crossroads leading to the Stabian baths, with a rough linen roll tucked under his arm. This was a place where the life of Pompeii's common folk was distilled. Along the street-facing L-shaped marble counter were deep holes, dolia, filled with warm wine, roasted lentils, and spicy lamb stew. Low-ranking merchants, porters, and off-duty gladiators chattered loudly as they chewed olives and drank cheap wine. Successus's eyes were fixed on the flushed cheeks of Iris, the young slave girl behind the counter, busily carrying wooden cups. Every time she brushed back her shining black hair and smiled at a customer, his heart pounded like a blacksmith's hammer. In the life of narrow, crowded alleys where privacy did not exist, the romances of Pompeii's common people were always public, direct, and noisy. Successus glanced around once, then pulled a piece of black charcoal from his tunic. He approached the smooth red plaster wall opposite the tavern, where people's eyes would fall most easily. That wall was nothing less than Pompeii's social media. Layer upon layer were written remarks such as, "Gladiator Celidus makes girls' hearts race," "Innkeeper, you sold watered wine," along with insults, cheers, and even tabs of unpaid drink debts. Finding an empty space, Successus pressed the charcoal firmly to the wall and wrote in rough but sincere Latin, "Successus the fuller loves Iris, the slave girl of the innkeeper. She does not look at me, but may she please know my poor heart." Just as he turned, pleased with his own courage, his rival Severus appeared with a smirking group of companions. Reading the words aloud in an exaggerated voice, Severus burst into laughter, snatched the remaining charcoal from Successus's hand, and began scrawling a reply directly beneath the confession. Severus writes this, "Successus, do not interfere in another man's love out of jealousy. Beautiful Iris likes me more." "What did you say, you insolent dog?" Unable to bear the insult, Successus seized Severus by the tunic, and the two young men rolled upon the ground in a cloud of dust. Nearby merchants and prostitutes whistled, clapped, and encouraged the fight. The commotion ended only when guards on patrol from the magistrate's office approached, swinging clubs. In Pompeii, love was not a whispered secret. It was a loud, heated festival, fixed red upon the walls for the entire city to read and meddle in. 10:30 a.m., the election campaign in red letters and the cold gaze of an old soldier. By after 10 o'clock, the area around the Forum, the political and religious center of the city, was so crowded there was hardly room to stand. Beneath the grand marble colonnades surrounding the vast rectangular square, groups of men argued intensely, veins bulging in their necks. The elections for Pompeii's highest magistrates, the Duumviri, and for the aediles, who oversaw roads and public order, were just around the corner. The walls of the square and the main roads connected to it were plastered with election notices called dipinti, painted in red and black. All the fullers recommend Julius Polybius for aedile. On a makeshift wooden platform stood the noble candidate Julius, his white toga, the symbol of privilege, flowing magnificently as he shouted his speech. "Citizens of Pompeii, if you elect me aedile, I will perfectly control the unjust rise in flour prices in this city. Furthermore, I swear before the gods that I shall replace the boilers of the aging caldarium in the Stabian baths with the finest bronze, paid for from my own private fortune." In the front rows, a group of clients economically tied to the house of Julius sent up thunderous applause and cheers as if rehearsed. Roman politics ran entirely on a system of patronage and reward. But leaning in the back against a temple column, arms folded, the old retired soldier, Titus, watched with a cold expression. A deep and ugly scar ran across his right cheek. Titus was a veteran who had fought as an auxiliary soldier in the muddy front lines of Gaul 20 years earlier, before retiring and settling in Pompeii. Repairing baths, my foot. Greedy aristocrats making nothing but sweet, empty promises to win votes. Just then, supporters of a rival candidate came charging in from the other side, clubs in hand, shouting, "Julius is a liar. How can anyone trust the man who canceled the promised beast hunt at the last gladiatorial games because it cost too much? Get out of here, lapdogs of Nuceria." In an instant, one corner of the square became a chaos of shouting, shoving, and rising dust. Someone hurled horse dung at a campaign notice bearing Julius's name. Clicking his tongue, Titus turned away. He remembered all too well the terrible tragedy that had occurred in the amphitheater in AD 59. A small quarrel between the citizens of Pompeii and the nearby city of Nuceria during a gladiatorial match had escalated into a massive riot and slaughter. Countless people had died under knives and stones, and Emperor Nero had punished Pompeii by banning gladiatorial games there for 10 years. Under the peaceful-looking sun, this fertile city was in truth a fierce time bomb, ready to explode at any moment over origin, class, and private interest. Though no weapons were drawn, the politics of this place were no less a battlefield stained with blood. 11:30 a.m., falling coins, and a boy's coming of age. The Macellum, the great food market just northeast of the Forum, was the throbbing heart of Pompeii's economy. Beneath the round dome, supported by 12 columns, fresh sea bream, eels, and massive tuna glistened upon ice and seaweed. The smell of the sea, the rich odor of lamb's blood from the butcher stalls, and the cries of olive oil merchants merged together into a strange vitality. Gaius, the merchant who had arrived early with his load of garum, now walked through the market in good spirits, his cart emptied and his leather purse grown thick. Intense bargaining continued at every turn. "1 silver denarius for only this much? You robbers! May Mercury, god of trade, curse you!" Copper asses and brass sestertii jingled endlessly from hand to hand. In one corner of the colonnade, money changers and bankers, argentari, filled wooden tablets coated in wax with neat rows of loans and interest rates using sharp iron styluses. This city moved with astonishing precision upon the cold order of numbers and credit, no less than upon faith and honor. Separated from the market by only a wall, in the nearby grand house known as the House of the Faun, a solemn rite was taking place. Lucius, the son of a powerful aristocratic family, had turned 16 that day. Before the richly decorated lararium, the shrine to the guardian spirits of the household and ancestors, the boy knelt. Behind him stood his father, symbol of the family's authority, and many relatives dressed neatly in togas, all holding their breath. Lucius carefully removed the golden bula, the amulet that had hung around his neck all his life to protect him from evil spirits, and placed it upon the altar. Then, he removed the boy's garment with the purple border, the toga praetexta. Guardian spirits of the family, I thank you for protecting me from sickness and evil fortune while I was foolish and incomplete. Now I cast off the shell of a weak child and shall fulfill my full responsibilities as a citizen of great Rome. His father stepped forward with heavy strides and placed over the boy's shoulders the dazzlingly white woolen garment that symbolized adult manhood, the toga virilis. The moment the huge length of cloth, nearly 6 meters long, was draped around him, the boy was reborn. No longer a free yet protected child, he had become a citizen of the empire, one who must bear the future of the family and endure honorable duties, politics, military service, and the management of property. Without a word, the father gripped his grown son's broader shoulders with force. Beneath his stern and rigid face, a deep pride and love beyond words trembled. 12:30 p.m. The veil of fire and a foreign goddess. The sun blazed white overhead, and heat shimmered up from the basalt-paved streets. At this stifling hour of noon, while most citizens of Pompeii had retreated into the shade for lunch and a midday sleep, a strange and captivating sound echoed through a narrow alley behind the theater. Jingle, jingle, churr. It was a procession of priests devoted to Isis, the goddess of resurrection and magic, whose cult had arrived from Egypt decades earlier and had spread explosively among foreigners, slaves, and women. Pompeii was an international port city where diverse goods and cultures flowed together. Alongside the traditional Roman state gods, Jupiter, Minerva, and the rest, such exotic mystery religions had taken deep root among the common people. The priests, with shaved heads and thin white linen garments, held high golden vessels containing sacred Nile water, relics of the goddess. Women worshippers in bright cosmetics shook bronze percussion instruments called sistra and spun as though in divine ecstasy. The scent of frankincense and myrrh rising from censers struck sharply at the nose, and people in the streets stopped their work to watch the strange and mesmerizing procession. From the second-floor balcony overlooking the alley through which the noisy procession passed, a young woman named Julia, about to be married that evening, looked down below. Her room was filled with the smell of roses and suffocating excitement. Skilled servant women were dividing her hair with a spear point and braiding it into the six-fold bridal style of a Roman bride, the sine crins. "My lady, even Venus herself would be jealous of your beauty." The servant carefully draped over her hair the bride's veil, the flammeum, a deep blend of orange and yellow. It was as though a living flame had been set upon her head. Marriage among the Roman elite was not merely a union of personal love, but a vast political and economic alliance between families. Once the sun had set and the first star appeared, torches would be lit, and wearing this flame-colored veil, she would join a grand procession, the deductio, to the house of her bridegroom, accompanied by musicians singing cheerful and indecent wedding songs. Her heart pounded with fear of an unknown husband and excitement at becoming a new mater familias. Her reflection in the bronze mirror looked strange and beautiful. Believing firmly that tonight she would be the most radiant being in the city, Julia rubbed red pigment onto her lips. 1 p.m., the frozen instant, and the sky collapses. 1 p.m. The city was rushing toward the peak of its day. The sun was dazzlingly clear, and the Mediterranean breeze blew peacefully. The merchant Gaius sat in the shade of his cart, wiping sweat from his brow and counting the silver coins in his leather purse with satisfaction. The slave girl Chloe straightened her bent back as she hauled up a heavy lead water vessel from the public well to prepare her master's late meal. The young father Marcus, beside his exhausted wife asleep at last, touched the tiny fingers stirring in the cradle, and was filled with joy. Successes, rubbing his bruised cheek, still grinned foolishly as he stole another glance toward Iris in the distance. Julius, having finished his speech, congratulated himself on the success of his bathhouse promise and drank down cool wine amid the cheers of his supporters. And the bride. Julia gazed up at the clear sky outside the window, longing for the sun to set so the festival of night could begin. All of them stood in the perfect middle point of a day so utterly ordinary, so indifferent, so naturally flowing. Each dreamed of tomorrow, better trade, freedom from slavery, love to be won. Then it happened. The solid marble beneath their feet convulsed. This was nothing like the faint trembling of the morning. A horrible, massive vibration rose through their souls and pierced their hearts, as though the very bottom of the world, the deep entrails of the earth, were splitting apart. Bricks screamed against one another, roof tiles cascaded to the ground, Gaius's cart overturned, and silver coins spilled over the stone road like a waterfall. Chloe's water jar struck the marble and shattered into pieces. The baby in the cradle shrieked in terror. Inside the tavern, huge wine jars burst under pressure, and red wine flowed into the street like blood. Julius's costly glass wine cup fell and exploded upon the ground. Startled, Julia clutched at her veil and leaned over the balcony. Amid the screams and confusion, all eyes turned northward. There stood Vesuvius, the kindly mountain that had always risen there in quiet grace, embraced by green vineyards. Its summit was gone. Only seconds later, the gigantic blast reached the city like a force ripping eardrums apart. In the place where the mountainside had been torn away, the sky flashed in a grotesque orange, and hundreds of thousands of tons of magma, rock, and poisonous gas, trapped deep underground for tens of thousands of years, erupted upward at hundreds of kilometers per hour as though to pierce the stratosphere. It was a colossal pillar of fire vomited forth by the earth. What Pliny the Younger would later describe from Misenum as a great umbrella pine, with a long trunk rising and branches spreading in the air, swallowed the sun in an instant, that terrifying mushroom-shaped volcanic cloud. It reached a height of 30 kilometers into the sky. The clear midday heavens suddenly turned into a pitch-black night in which nothing could be distinguished. From that sky of fear, small white volcanic stones cooled in the heights, pumice, began to fall like hail. Tap, tap, tot-a-tot. At first, the stones fell like raindrops. Soon they became a furious storm, pounding rooftops and streets. A ripping scream filled the square. Some dropped to their knees, calling it the wrath of the gods. Others seized the hands of their loved ones and ran blindly into the darkness to escape the rain of stone. The smell of sulfur spread over the chaotic streets like poison. The hourglass of fate for this prosperous city of a great empire had already been turned. The question held by the ashes, the cast of an eternal today. The eruption that began around 1 o'clock that afternoon continued without pause for 18 hours. The endless fall of light pumice and ash buried the entire city to a depth of 2 meters. Roofs and columns, unable to bear the terrible weight, collapsed and crushed countless people hiding inside their homes. Then, on the following morning, a pyroclastic flow of ash and gas at over 400 degrees Celsius, rushing down the mountainside like an avalanche at hundreds of kilometers per hour, completely engulfed Pompeii. Those who had not managed to escape, people trembling by the shore or in underground storage rooms, had their breath cut off in less than a second by the burning gas and ash. The city vanished beneath a volcanic blanket more than 6 meters deep. It was the moment the name Pompeii was erased from the map of the Roman Empire. The frantic hands of Gaius, scrambling to gather his scattered silver coins, the terror of Chloe, dropping her jar and clutching her head, the desperate curl of Marcus and his wife, trying to shield their newborn child, the despair of Successus, who never did take Iris's hand, the fixed gaze of the retired soldier Titus beneath the campaign posters, the anticipation of Julia, wearing her flame-colored veil, yet never crossing the threshold. All of them hardened forever in their final moments, in their final emotions, in the exact posture of that last instant within the boiling cloud of ash several meters thick. Thousands of years later, in the 19th century, the Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli discovered strange hollow spaces within the hardened layers of volcanic ash. When plaster was poured into those empty cavities left after the bodies had decayed away, the pain and life of that day, 2,000 years earlier, rose again in physical form. Thus, the casts of Pompeii show us something beyond a vast ruin or the terror of natural disaster. In every fold of cloth, every twisted expression, every outstretched hand reaching for someone, there is preserved a single perfect today that can never return. They are the coldest and saddest proof of how suddenly, how helplessly, the countless paths of lives lived as though they would last forever can be halted before the immense force of nature. This ordinary day that we so casually let pass by, the crowded rush of the commute, a trivial argument at a street corner, a short message sent to a lover, the smell of freshly baked bread and stew rising from the dinner table, may in truth be a great miracle of an instant whose ending we can never predict. Pompeii, which emerged into the world again through thick volcanic ash after 2,000 years, asks us, quietly yet powerfully, through its frozen gray gestures, a question that crosses the centuries and reaches those of us living today. Even if the dark shadow of death were to fall over you tomorrow, no, even right this moment, are you loving fiercely enough today and living this given moment fully enough that you would have no regret? The reason the tragedy of Pompeii holds us for so long even today is not merely because it was a city that vanished in an instant. Rather, it is because even in their final moments, people there were still living as they always had, doing business, waiting for love, holding children in their arms, and preparing for tomorrow. That is why Pompeii is not a ruined relic of the past, but a mirror that reflects us today. The city tells us quietly, after 2,000 years of silence, how precious and fragile a miracle a day can be, even when it seems as though nothing at all will happen. That is all for the story I prepared today. This was Sage, the cat author who turns the knowledge of the world into little books.